The very fact that in biology we've discovered the longest word, the human genome, 3.4 billion letters in the chemical alphabet, is evidence of an intelligent mind.
John Lennox gives completely amazing proof for a God, and it's not because of the God of the gaps. It's actually the opposite. So make sure to watch till the end because of a Bible verse that will tie all of this together, and I just think this is just so beautiful and amazing, and you're going to learn so much from it. Let's get into it.
Which is the God of the gaps. Now, I'm allergic to this in the sense that I do not want people to think that I believe in a God of the gaps. So how do I deal with it? Well, in several different ways. I'm going to go for the easiest one. And it's this, that think of Isaac Newton and his wonderful law of gravitation. And I used to love explaining it to students, how you get an equation with 8 symbols in it, and from it you could deduce the motion of the planets around the sun. It is just brilliant stuff. Now, when Newton discovered that, did he think, right, I have now got an equation that allows me to deduce the motion of the planets from it. I don't need God. No, he didn't. He wrote what was perhaps the most brilliant book in the history of science, the Principia Mathematica, and he dedicated it with the hope that thinking people would see in it evidence for the existence of a divine intelligence behind the universe, because his argument was this: I found this wonderful mathematical description of what goes on in between heavy bodies and how they move. What a brilliant God who did it that way. And it's exactly that in the way we normally think. If you know a lot about painting, you will see much more in a Rembrandt picture than I would, who am pretty ignorant about art, although I like it. You can see the genius. If you're an engineer, you'll see much more in a Rolls-Royce engine than I possibly would, because you see the evidence. And to my mind, God is not a God of the gaps. He is the most powerful explanatory power to make sense of the whole thing. I'm a mathematician. The very fact that we can do mathematics, to me, is an indicator that this is a word-based universe, to put it that way. The very fact that in biology we've discovered the longest word, the human genome, 3.4 billion letters in the chemical alphabet, is evidence of an intelligent mind. That's not a mind of the gaps. It's the only thing that makes sense. Now, I'm looking around the room, but the lights are blinding me. Oh yes, I see a word up there, prayer. How very suitable. There are 2, 4, 6 letters. The moment you see that, what do you deduce? Well, you can see letters. They have meaning to you. You cannot explain that meaning in terms of the physics and chemistry of the paper and paint there. But the moment you see that, there are many mechanical processes that went in producing that sign. But you know, because that carries meaning, it's a word, that behind it there was a mind. Not a mind of the gaps, but a mind that's the only sensible explanation of what you're reading up there. It's that kind of argument, to my mind, that I find extremely convincing.
That is absolutely amazing. Like, yeah, we don't just believe, oh, we have no idea, so of course God did it. That's not what we're saying at all. There's so much evidence for...
Richard and Ogden published this book in 1923, 100 years ago, called The Meaning of Meaning.
Yes.
And it's a very popular book, and they talked about how language influences thought and affects thought. And they devised the semantic triangle, which is a model of meaning, and you have the symbol or the sign, linguistic sign, on one side. You have the actual thing in reality on the other side, which is the referent. And then you have at the top thought. And it's the relation and the causal relation and interactions of these three that give you meaning. This book actually was very influential in philosophy and also influenced C.S. Lewis in The Abolition of Man, published in 1943, in which he talked about objective moral standards and also natural law. So people and scientists sometimes say, look, there's this universe out there, with millions of galaxies, with hundreds of thousands of stars. And they all dance together in a very interesting, in a beautiful rhythm because of the gravity law. But there is no meaning to that. And also, as a human being, which is, as humans, this is a microcosm. There's no meaning in our life either. Does meaning imply intelligent design?
It's interesting that people should even say a thing like that. There is no meaning in it. And they expect me to understand the meaning of that statement. It's one of these incoherent things that people make statements and they are unconsciously accepting themselves. It's like, may I tell a little story?
Please do.
Sitting in my Oxford College beside a man who had a book, and he was putting it on the table, and I could see its title was curious, about semantics and so on. I said, what's your book about? Well, he said, this is a book that shows that there's no such thing as authorial intention. I said, pardon? I said, you mean if I read your book, I will understand that an author has no intention? He said, exactly. So I said, I'm not going to read it. So he said, why not? Well, I said, it must apply to your book as well. Well, he'd never thought about it. He got very angry and he got up and walked out. We never saw him again. This is one of the weaknesses of this sort of loose postmodern style talk that says there's no such thing as truth, but they expect you to believe that statement as a truth. It goes too far. It goes right over the top. Now, I'm very interested in the kind of way in which you pose that question, because another person that influenced Lewis a lot, one of his inklings, was Barfield. And Owen Barfield posed an interesting question. He said, why is it we live in a world where we understand how almost everything works and we know the meaning of nothing? Ian McGilchrist is a very interesting, he's a polymath really, he's a neuroscientist, but roughly speaking, he's been working on something we're all familiar with. When we say, Jane, you know, she's a real left-brained nerd, always into computers and all this kind of thing. Whereas James, well, he's so right-brained with his head in arts and the clouds and so on. Left and right brain. Well, what Ian McGilchrist claims in his very interesting book, which is called, this is a very interesting title, The Matter with Things, is that there is substance to these differences between the two brain hemispheres. And roughly speaking, both brain hemispheres are involved in virtually every event in our brains and minds, but the differences are that indeed there is this concentration in the left brain on rational thought, on analysis, on breaking things down, whereas the right brain concerns itself much more with putting things into context and meaning. And he says this, for the last 400 or 500 years, we have neglected the right brain, so that we're living in a world where we know how most things work, but we understand the meaning of nothing. And when our late chief rabbi, Jonathan Sachs, read that, he had a light bulb moment. And he wrote a book because of it, a very interesting book called The Great Partnership. But he put it this way, and I like this formulation, it's very helpful. He said, science takes things apart to see how they work. Religion puts them together to see what they mean. And it seems to me that that captures something extremely important, that we need to focus on the meaning side, because science is powerful precisely because it limits the questions it can answer. It cannot give us meaning and it cannot give us value. Einstein saw that years ago. He said you could talk about the ethical foundations of science, but you cannot talk about the scientific foundations of ethics. You have to look outside. And I always cite one of Richard Dawkins' favorite scientists, Sir Peter Medawar, who said it's so easy to see, and this is hugely important because science is so powerful. It's so easy to see, he wrote, that science is limited because it cannot even answer the simple questions of a child. Where do I come from? Where am I going? And what is the meaning of life? And to answer those questions, we need to go to literature, and I would add, well, he added philosophy, and I would add theology and a lot of other things as well. Because the fatal flaw in much so-called academic thinking is that people have come to believe that science is coextensive with rationality, which is nonsense. History is a rational discipline, so is theology, so is economics, but they're not the natural sciences. If science and rationality were coextensive, you'd have to close half the departments in every university in the United Kingdom. So that's how I'd begin to approach your question.
So science...
That's absolutely amazing. Science cannot solve the meaning of life. Sorry, but God can. Theology can. Finding who you are, finding purpose. Science will not give you meaning. So that's why going to Jesus is the ultimate meaning. Going to Jesus will truly set you free. Going to Jesus will give you ultimate satisfaction and joy. So now I have a Bible verse that will tie all of this together. Colossians 1:16 says, "For through him God created everything in the heavenly realms and on earth. He made the things we can see and the things we can't see, such as thrones, kingdoms, rulers, authorities in the unseen world. Everything was created through him and for him." And they're talking about God here. Everything was created through him and for him. So I encourage you to go to God. He loves you. In the description below, you can click the link to help you decide to follow Jesus for the first time. I encourage you to do that today. It would make all the difference in the world. And guys, subscribe. I'm trying to hit 20,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I know we could do it with your help. So thank you for all the love and the support. It means the world to me. And guys, you might also like this video here. Peace.